I'm Tim Ventura, and in this presentation, we'll be analyzing the Preliminary Assessment Unidentified Aerial Phenomena report released on June 25th, 2021 by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, as well as providing highlights on some of its key findings. This report is historically valuable as being the first official acknowledgement of the UAP phenomena by the United States government. This report is provided by ODNI in response to the provision in Senate Report 116-233, accompanying the Intelligence Authorization Act for Fiscal Year 2021, that the Director of National Intelligence, in consultation with the Secretary of Defense, is to submit an intelligence assessment of the threat posed by unidentified aerial phenomena and the progress made by the Department of Defense Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force in understanding this threat. Additional analysis and commentary will be provided by Franc Milburn, a former UK Defense Intelligence Officer and Army Paratrooper with over 23 years of experience producing threat and risk assessments for clients operating in hostile environments. Frank is an alumnus of the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst and the London School of Economics, and the author of the Pentagon's UAP Task Force, published through the Begin-Sadat Center at Bar-Ilan University.
So I wanted to start with report structure. Again, I'm in a bunch of mailing lists, email lists, and one of the complaints that I saw from many people about this is the entire report is only 9 pages long. The actual body of the report, the part that matters, is only 5 pages long, right? So this is a very short report, but it is what it is, and it contains summaries and conclusions, not detailed descriptions. So I think that helps to offset the short length of the report. In other words, they're providing summaries and conclusions, not the details. Maybe the details were in the classified annex, I'm not sure. Another thing that was in the mailing lists that I wanted to just kind of address was there are lots of qualifiers and softeners in this report. So instead of saying yes or no, they would say it's likely to, it's not likely to, most sightings contained, many sightings contained. Again, they've softened the heck out of this and they've tried to qualify it as much as possible. And I think there are many reasons for that, part of it is just the lack of hard knowledge on this, right? A lot of these reports, again, one of the things they mentioned over and over again was there wasn't a standard reporting process in place until just recently. Even that standard reporting process doesn't span the entire military. I believe it's the Navy standardized first. If I understand this correctly, the Air Force kind of picked up on that. So, they've tried to kind of keep it as vague as they can so that they're not incorrect about things, right? So some of the videos, testimonies, and supporting data is already public. I thought that this was important to mention also. Obviously, they mentioned a lot of stuff in that report that we haven't seen. Maybe we'll never see it, but I think some of the key elements, right, the gimbal, go fast videos and things like that, they're already out there. We've already seen them. And so that helps. It's something to keep in mind, right? When you read this report, keep in mind that you've already seen some, maybe a lot of the data, in terms of the scope of this report, it only includes military incidents between 2004 and 2021. So this kind of creates a bifurcation in the UFO community. And this is something that was interesting to me. This date goes back to, 1947, and actually UFOs go back further than that. But you could say the modern era started in 1947. And yet they're creating kind of this bifurcation of data where they're really only focused on these military incidents, starting with kind of the Nimitz encounter, right? So you've got 2004 to 2021. Interestingly, the majority of incidents were reported from the last 2 years due to better reporting. I thought that this was interesting that they put this in the report. I had thought that they would focus mostly on the 2004 incidents, but it sounds like there are some very recent things that they were looking at as well. So there were 144 UAP reports originating from US government sources. 80 of those reports involved observations with multiple sensors. Okay. So I don't know, I'd say that's close to a little bit over half of those. So UAPs are physical objects. Again, when I put these together, I tried to remove the qualifiers and the softeners. I looked at what are they really saying? They're really saying UAPs are physical objects. Not all of them, some of them, okay? Most of the UAPs reported probably do represent physical objects, given the majority were registered across multiple sensors, including radar, infrared, electro-optical weapon seekers, and visual observation. Obviously, not all of those all of the time, but over half were seen in multiple sources. So what the UAP task force is saying here is, hey, these things are real, right? Probably real, because again, everything is qualified and softened. Multiple types of UAPs. This to me is interesting because when I think UAP, because I've been focused on the military sightings, I'm thinking orbs and tic tacs, and those kind of have a, they seem like they kind of go together, I guess. Now, when they talk about UAPs, they're saying, okay, there are multiple types requiring different explanations. They categorize these into 5 categories. And I guess this makes sense. People handed them just this bag of stuff and they had to sort it out. So they listed those, and I'm going to skip reading this because I actually broke down the categories here. 5 explanatory categories: airborne clutter, balloons, birds, UAVs, airborne debris. The one I'm smiling when I think of this was the deflated Batman balloon that the jet went by at 600 miles an hour, and somehow he managed to get a photo of it. I don't know if it was caught in the jet stream or what, but I saw that and I said, oh my God, that's a Batman balloon. And, so they did have one that they described definitively. They didn't say it was that one. They said they did have one that was a balloon. That was one of the UAP sightings, was a balloon. The rest, unknown. Natural atmospheric phenomena, ice crystals, moisture. They also listed temperature inversions and a few other things. So some of these things are known to throw radar off. I believe that modern radar systems are not as susceptible. And again, when you have multiple sensors, it's probably less likely to be susceptible than older systems. But back in the 1950s, the 1952, the UFOs over Washington, I believe that was explained as temperature inversion, right, which can fool radar. So they listed that as a potential explanation. Another one, this interested me that they would mention it because, again, this is an official US government report. They mentioned USG or industry developmental programs. What they're saying here is black projects might be classified US programs, and they were unable to get confirmation that it was, right? Now, that's interesting on many, many different levels because it speaks to, I think it speaks to some issues within the US government if they're not able to tell whether or not it's theirs. But I think what they were really saying is it could be ours, but we didn't see anything to say that it was. So another one was foreign adversary systems. This is one that's come up on the news many times. I believe Congress people like Marco Rubio and I believe several others have mentioned this as well. China, Russia, other nations or non-governmental entities or organizations, so the NGOs. So that was there. And then number 5 is other. This was a catch-all category, which they said, and again, some of the language they used was interesting for an official government report, pending scientific advances to understand them. Now, to me, again, they never said aliens. They never said ET anywhere in this report. They never mentioned aliens or ET, but at the same time, pending scientific advances to understand them, I don't know. It seems like that kind of pushes into that territory. Not necessarily, but it kind of hints at it. So they also talked about a clustering of observations. There was wide variability in the reports, not surprisingly. The data set was limited, not surprisingly. But what they found was the UAP sightings tended to cluster, and they had 2 different kinds of clusters. There was clustering of UAP observations regarding shape, size, and particularly propulsion. I thought that was very interesting. UAP sightings also tended to cluster around US training and testing grounds, but they assessed that this could be from collection bias. In other words, these are military reports of UAPs. Where are you most likely to see them? Where there are the most military activity, the most military people, right? And jets and things like that. It's going to be training and testing grounds, stuff like that. Okay. So UAPs demonstrate advanced technology. Again, I thought that this was very interesting. They qualified the heck out of this. So it may demonstrate advanced technology, but there you have it. So they're talking about that. If this was going to be explained away as swamp gas, like in the old days, they wouldn't have to talk about advanced tech at all. So they said in 18 incidents described in 21 reports, observers reported unusual UAP movement patterns or flight characteristics. Some UAP appeared to remain stationary in winds aloft, move against the wind, maneuver abruptly, or move at considerable speed without discernible means of propulsion. In a small number of cases, military aircraft systems processed radio frequency energy associated with UAP sightings. That one is also very, very interesting. I was not aware of that. So that could mean jamming. It could mean that they were giving off, who knows, some kind of radio communications. It could mean a number of different things. They were able to detect RF energy associated with UAP sightings. So finally, we have demonstrating acceleration or a degree of signature management. Signature management could mean visual, could mean RF, it could mean jamming. There could be many different things. So again, all of these are kind of techno-signatures, right? Which I believe, I think that's the new word of the day. Now we're looking for alien techno-signatures around the cosmos. Well, we also see techno-signatures in UAPs, which to me indicates that these are artificial and intelligently controlled. UAPs are a flight safety risk. UAPs clearly pose a safety of flight issue and may pose a challenge to national security. So I wanted to put that in there. Their word was clearly, UAP clearly pose a safety of flight issue. Safety concerns primarily center on aviators contending with an increasingly cluttered air domain. And there were 11 reports of documented instances in which pilots reported near misses with the UAP. Okay, so in other words, these things are getting up close and personal with our aviators as they're flying, as they're doing training exercise. That's dangerous, right? This is something that we need to understand in more detail. There's also a potential national security risk. And I think Frank is on here. He can speak to more of this in just a moment, actually in about 2 seconds, because this is my last slide. UAP sightings also tended to cluster around US training and testing grounds. This could be a collection bias. I already read that one to you. I just wanted to kind of reaffirm that. They said, again, it's the same statement. They put it in there twice. UAP have been detected near military facilities or by aircraft carrying the USG's most advanced sensor systems. And the UAPTF is monitoring for evidence of foreign adversary involvement, which basically just means they're keeping an eye on it. So those were kind of my takeaways from it.
Yeah, I didn't have massive expectations for it, but there's lots of good little nuggets in it. But I saw a very good comment from PsychoOp on Twitter, and I agree with it wholeheartedly. And he basically said, I'd urge everyone who felt underwhelmed by the report to go back and read the conclusions from the Robertson panel, Project Blue Book and the Condon Committee. Now read the DNI report again. Basically take the win because the issue is moving forward. It's UAP have been basically put out there. They exist. They are craft seen on multiple sensors. This has now been, officially declared in a report. Resources are going to be put forward towards developing analysis of UAP, and it's basically a very positive development as far as I'm concerned. I mean, if you were expecting hangar doors to open at Area 51 and all that kind of stuff, then you are going to be disappointed. I mean, if the US Navy, and I've said this before, if the US Navy has, develops like a new hunter killer submarine, would you really expect them to go into detail about the acoustic coating that it has on its hull or the silent propulsion system? No, you wouldn't. Of course, the US government isn't going to tell all. One thing that I saw was missing from this. They do go into the sort of the navigation risk, the air risk of collision. They talk about, the potential national security threat, but they didn't talk about the nuclear aspect. Now, I know they've only gone back to 2004, but even if you include that, 2004, and also the incidents off the East Coast, like more recently with the Roosevelt carrier strike group, you've still got UAP in the vicinity of basically nuclear powered and nuclear armed platforms, because a strike group, the carrier has, obviously a reactor, the submarines accompanying it will have a nuclear reactor, they have, they're nuclear armed. So that's kind of concerning. I mean, I would have thought because that was already out there in the public domain that they could have stressed that. I mean, because that to me would be a pretty significant factor. I think they could have stressed a lot more. I mean, the actual, the incursion threat, the fact that they are being seen, around training areas, pilots reported seeing them, for weeks, if not months on end. They could have stressed that more. I'm hoping that, the nuclear aspect and the other aspects of, the threat will be in the classified report, and I would expect them to be. I mean, arguably, if you could talk about, what they basically haven't mentioned, which is when they've actually tried to intercept them with weapons, right? So if you go back to, the 1976 Tehran case and the 1980 Peru case, were both cases where military aircraft attempted to intercept UFOs and actually attempted to fire weapons. In the Peru case, the pilot, emptied like 600 rounds of 23 Mike into a UFO. And he actually says, and he's interviewed in Leslie Kean's book, he said, I had air-to-air combat with UFO, right? But his rounds didn't do anything. And then the Tehran case, you had the pilot thought, that there was a projectile actually launched at him because there was, an orb that kind of flew past him. He thought it was something that had been launched at his aircraft. And then he tried to select a missile and his weapon systems went offline. And both those you could argue are mass sightings. The Peru case, I think there were like, there was like 1,500 guys on parade, like at this airbase in Peru, and everybody saw this craft. And then the Tehran case, it was seen, multiple radar operators. It was seen by, 4 crew members of 2 separate Imperial Iranian Air Force Phantoms. So you could arguably say that was a mass sighting event as well, because civilians saw it, the lights in the sky too. So I would be very interested in those cases where American aircraft or NATO aircraft attempted to intercept UAP and attempted to launch weapons at them, because that would give you a much better idea of the threat, both in terms of what was going through the minds of the military when they attempted to, well, effectively, shoot down the UFOs, and the other side is, what effect did the weapons have on the UFOs, if any?
So this came out yesterday. I wanted to show you this, but I thought I should probably show the whole audience this. Hopefully you guys can see it okay. Why the Pentagon UFO Port is deeply troubling for U.S. security experts. Now, they had already, I bet you, they'd already written most of this, because this came out the same day as the report. And actually it came out at 1704 Eastern time. So they probably only had a couple of hours to write it. So either they had the fastest author or they already had most of it in place. The thing that got me about it was this: about halfway down in this Guardian article. So, and I'll just read it. It's Marieke von Rennenkampf, who served at the Pentagon as an analyst in the State Department's Bureau of International Security and Non-Proliferation, said that if a foreign power was behind the aircraft, they would have performed a breathtaking technological leap, and U.S. intelligence would have suffered an immense failure. Now, I'm not sure if he keeps getting requoted or not. I don't think so. I think that he is saying the same thing verbatim. Maybe that's the party line that other people have said. Then he said, China has well-documented issues with basic jet engines. They rely on espionage to develop their most advanced systems. So I struggle with China having developed this. Russia has a defense budget that is a fraction of the United States, and much of its military infrastructure is crumbling. So I struggle with that too. And he went on to say, if it's China or Russia, then it's extraordinary. I don't know how they did it. It would be monumental failure of intelligence collection on the part of the United States. So, Frank, the reason I wanted to, sorry, I didn't mean to scroll up. The reason I wanted to show that to yourself and our audience was, do you think these statements kind of rule out any kind of Earth-based powers, or?
Yeah, I do. I do. I mean, obviously keeping an open mind, but I mean, we discussed, remember, Tim, you and I, and the other members of APEC who were there, and also with Nick Pope, we went into this in some detail. Is it Chinese tech? Is it Russian tech? And what this guy says about China has well-documented issues with basic jet engines. You remember I said that the Russians had refused to sell them the most up-to-date engines that they had for their 5th-generation jet. So their Chengdu fighter, which is basically looks like a copy of American stealth 5th-gen aircraft, is using a 1980s jet. Yeah. Because the Russians don't want to sell the Chinese, this engine. So we discussed how the Chinese are basically trying to acquire this aero engine maker in Ukraine, which could provide them with a much better jet for their 5th-generation fighter. Because arguably their 5th-gen fighter isn't a 5th-gen fighter if it's got a 1980s jet in it, and it's had marked performance issues, right? They've seen it at air shows, for example. If you look as well at Chinese intentions, I mean, if you look at their current capabilities, what they have, I mean, there's nothing that indicates 5 observable tic-tac tech, as Jack Sarfati would call it. Their intentions in public, their leadership has stated in public that they want to retake Taiwan by force if necessary, that it's the inevitable consequence of, the reunification of the country. So there's no doubt about it. And if you look at how they've been developing their military over the last 20 years, amphibious forces, airborne forces, rocket forces, air forces, naval forces, it's all geared towards 1, invading Taiwan, and 2, ensuring anti-access area denial to make sure that, the Americans, the Japanese, and the Australians can't interfere once the Chinese feel that they've got to a stage where they can overwhelm Taiwan's defenses. Yeah, because it's not just about attacking the island. They have to stop America intervening. So if they had UAP technology, i.e. 5 observable tech, they'd already be in Taiwan, right? If the Russians had 5 observable tech, why would they just be in Crimea? They would have the whole of Ukraine. They'd have the Baltic states. They would have reconstituted the former Soviet Union, because clearly Putin and Russian population in general are unhappy about what happened with the former Soviet Union. Hence their war in Georgia in 2008. And again, if you look at the development of the Russian forces, what have they been doing? They haven't been able to modernize across the board. So they've had to sort of cherry pick, because they've got even, far more limited resources than the Americans have available, and then the Chinese have available. So they've modernized subs, they've modernized some nukes. They basically spend a lot of money on electronic warfare. They basically fitted everything that floats with cruise missiles and anything that flies with cruise missiles. And also expeditionary forces like airborne and Marines. And you've seen this in Syria, that they fielded their latest kit. But the Russians have had to, really, really choose just a few areas, to modernize, or even, stay up to date with, because they can't afford to modernize across the board. And, I've seen no evidence that they have anything, remotely approaching, 5 observable tech. And, if you marry that up with their intentions, the Russians wouldn't be worried. For example, recently that Royal Navy vessel in the Black Sea. Well, there wouldn't be any NATO vessels in the Black Sea if the Russians had UAP technology.
Yeah. Well, so I was going to ask about this 5 observables too. One of the things, Gary Stevenson had mentioned this in an earlier conference, that the UAP met the pilots back at the cap point, right? And in order to do that, they would have had to understand our communication signals. Do you think that might be a 6th observable? The ability to, and I guess there's no guarantee that that's what happened, but it seems like they were able to monitor, decrypt, and understand our communications.
Yeah, I actually talked about that in some detail with Dr. Jack Sarfati. It was like the UAP, to get, you know, to understand and what was happening, to be at the cap point, would have to have some kind of, like, you know, very advanced quantum, post-quantum computing and predictive technology. It was hardwired into Navy communications and journey management systems, navigation systems. 3, there was a human agent on board the US Navy vessels, like transmitting to the UAP what was going on. 4, the UAP was hardwired or could somehow access the navigation systems of the aircraft. 5, this is talking with Dr. Jack, it was, you know, basically time travelers from the future, if you want to go the Michael Masters route. So the UAP, the intelligences behind it, already knew what was going to happen and where the cap point was going to be, you know. So there's there's a lot of different possibilities here, but the fact is that it's highly advanced. And maybe you could add to that, as a 6th observable, a completely autonomous conscious AI, as Dr. Jack Sarfati would say. Could I just make one more point?
Sure.
I was actually looking for this. It was actually not in the report at all, but there's another little gem that nobody picked up on, which was the actual press release by Admiral John Kirby. If you go down to the end, so it says this plan will be developed in coordination with various DoD components, right? Then you go down a bit and it says the plan will establish procedures for synchronizing collection, reporting, and analysis of UAP, provide recommendations for securing military test and training ranges, and identify requirements for the establishment and operation of new follow-on DoD activity to lead the effort. So he's talking recommendations for securing military test and training ranges, yeah? So you're not talking about like fencing and floodlights here. How are you going to stop UAP coming in? If you go on what we know, like the Tehran case, the Peru case, kinetic energy weapons don't work, rockets don't work, missiles, whether it's radar homing or infrared. So how are you going to stop these UAP? Are we talking some kind of directed energy weapon? Are we talking an electromagnetic pulse that they're developing to use against the UAP? Maybe to, and I'm just speculating here, kind of like destabilize the warp field potentially, and then maybe use like rail guns to penetrate once the warp field is down. I'm just speculating here, but I thought that was a very interesting little nugget. Recommendations for securing military test and training ranges. How are you going to do that? What does it involve?